if I can figure out how to sync up all of these systems. My name is Mia Vaughnes, and that used to be me. And it's funny, look at that little girl, full of hopes and dreams, very trusting, naked, and one with the earth. My daughter actually cropped that picture because my little nipples were showing, but I'm 2, come on, I'm 2. So, but that's me looking at my father, which, I loved my father very, very much. He was my hero. And, I still identify with that little girl. And so what I do every day of my life, I get so much joy out of it because I get to work with people that look like that, little ones. That's one of the things I get to do. So I'm just so happy to be able to be here with you. And before I go any further, I do want to give a special shower of love to David and Erin Penwell, who could not make it here today, but they were the ones that invited me to come share my experiences and my thoughts. And they are just superhuman. And I also want to give a really special thanks to my daughter, who is the fruit of my womb and my absolute total support. She's always there for me, morally, emotionally, spiritually, and she also is very logistically inclined and computer-oriented, and I'm not. So if you enjoy these slides and you can see them, then I have her to thank you, so thank you very much. So let's talk a little bit about water. Now, if I don't speak specifically about water, I will promise to use as many watery words as I can think of to keep us afloat, okay? Because water was our first hood, right? It was our first hood, right? That's where we were steeped for 9 months. We were steeped in the water. And that water was the one thing that protected our mothers from a fatal blow, right? So water, we owe a lot to water. And, after the water broke, we were able to make the center stage, right? Come onto the earth. And the water that we enjoy every day in the form of a shower just invigorates us and energizes us, and it does something to our cellular structure that we may not fully understand. But it's that water, that same water, that for centuries people have used in purification ceremonies. So water is very divine, and it's sacred. So for 24 years, I had a corporate career in high heels, in a high-rise just down the street. But now I am living a reinvented life on my hands and knees as an urban farmer. Yes. So I know very intimately that water is the source of life. And, if you think about a single drop of water, let's see if I can do this. Can you see that? If you think about a single drop of water, you would think, how does that amount to much? But if you're starving, or if you're dying of thirst or dehydrated, water is everything, right? And nothing less. So, water is also, it's interesting because it's actually very intelligent, right? Water finds its way to the lowest point. Water can move things with it. Water can shape. Water can transform. And we see that happening with the earth. So, I want you to take a moment, and I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to do a visualization of tiny droplets falling from above onto the ground, and I want you to see it move. Okay, now open your eyes. Did anybody want to share something that they saw? Anybody? Yes. Yes. So water can break off into different sections. So she saw that. So you're acquainted with it. And that's in your spirit. Our spirit is said to have a character like water. So I think it's a good idea in the mornings to do something like that. Water is the source of life, just like air and the sun and the nutrients that we need, and love, right? So can we digress for a minute, and can I share my love story with you? Because it's my inspiration, and I promise to bring you back to the topic of water, quenched and refreshed, okay? So in 2008, I ran into a man that I had met 20 years prior when we were both students at UCSD. He was a mighty medical student, and I was a lowly undergrad. But I remember having opportunities to chat with him between classes, and he was a really good listener, and so our conversations had this gentle ease to it, and it was very natural and relaxing. It kind of calmed me, and I just remember the conversations, but I was 19 at the time, and I could tell he liked me, but I didn't really make much of it because I was new on campus, and I thought, I got to get into my studies. And so, like most acquaintances do, we smiled and waved on occasion, but eventually we went our separate ways. 2 decades later, I saw him at a dance studio, the Culture Shock Dance Studio. His son and my daughter were taking classes, and we were in the lobby, and we were waiting, and I didn't recognize him at first sight, but then he started to talk, and I got that same kind of easy feeling, kind of flow like water feeling, right? From him. And I thought, this guy's such a good listener. I like his vibe. I like this guy. And so the class ended, and we committed to a tennis date. That essentially lasted for 3 years, pretty much weekly. And during that time, one day, he said, would you like to read a book with me? And I said, sure. So we kind of jumped right into it. The book was called A Purpose-Driven Life. And by the 4th chapter, we decided we were going to take a risk and do something that was rather intimate, and that we would begin to pray for one another to live in our purpose. And so we did. And by the 7th chapter, our friendship had developed into a very inspirational companionship. So we became one another's sort of spiritual confidant, and we were kind of in, That's how we developed our intimacy. And so our friendship developed into something more. And one day, he appeared on my doorstep, not with a bouquet of flowers, but rather he reached out for my hand and he said, "Can I build you a garden?" And I was like, what? Yeah. So a couple of days later, he was on his hands and knees. He was pouring his golden heart into the soil, cultivating my joy with his bare hands. And he had created a beautiful, intimate, thriving, budding, blooming system of life around me in my small little space where I lived, and it gave me such joy. What do you think of that? Okay. So it gets better. He moves up north, and I'm still here, and he invites me to come to his place up north. And he picks me up from the airport one day, and he said, "Let's go to the nursery. We're going to buy some seedlings. Let's create our own edible garden together, our first edible garden together." And I thought, wow. I mean, that last garden was cool, flowers and stuff, but wow, we're going to eat from this garden? So we went to the nursery, we got some things, and man, we just started putting it in the ground. And honestly, we prayed over every little thing we planted, and we just could see it. We had all this hope and faith that it would produce great bounty. And sure enough, the tomatoes never tasted so good. There was more cucumbers and basil and onions, and we even spent the night in the garden one day because we had to harvest, and it took so long to harvest everything. So we were amazed. But to be totally honest with you, we grew too many tomatoes, and the basil was so overgrown that it started to go to seed. And he was newly relocated up there, and I was living down here, so we really didn't have a community of people to share the bounty with. And so you know what we did is we had to compost it. And in some cases, I think we might have even had to toss some of it. And that really disturbed my spirit, because this food that was so beautiful and bountiful and so nutritious was actually an expression of the faithfulness and the love that we shared with one another, and the love that we felt God had for us to provide it. Because let's face it, we can plant a seed, and we can even water it, but it's the creator of the seed that actually gives the increase. So I came back down and I thought, this is really not sitting right with me. And one day I was in my living room and we were on the phone together, and I said, shh, I think I'm getting something. I think we're actually supposed to do this for others. I think I can see us growing food in people's yards and encouraging them to eat it and encouraging them to share it. And I think we're supposed to teach people how to love each other like that. What do you think? And after about one full minute of silence, he offered, without any contest, he offered a resolute and calm, okay. So Good Neighbor Gardens was born in 2012, pretty much in that moment. That's how I remember it. And we've installed over 116 gardens in people's yards and on school campuses in the last 6 years. There's Walt and me. These are the gardens that we have, some of the gardens that we have in town. We basically install the garden in people's yards, and then we give them their own personal farmhand who shows up to maintain it. Because a lot of people want to eat from their own garden, but they just don't have the time or the inclination or the know-how to do it. So we give them a farmhand, and then we also collect fruit from people, and this is a beautiful, lovely lady with her pecans from her tree, and we distribute it to others who actually subscribe online to get a harvest box every other week. And then a portion of that subscription fee goes to support our school garden education program. So we are in, those are some more gracious neighbors. We are in, that's our harvest box, 5 elementary schools currently during the curriculum day. When the kids go to PE after that, they go to garden. So this is how we do it, and our goal is to have this be fully sustainable. So the kids actually get to implement the garden, and they study in it. We teach everything there is to learn from a garden, which is pretty much everything. So these kids understand water. They understand pH of water. They're learning how to micro-irrigate these beds. They're starting to study the flow rates. They understand, filtration. So these are elementary school students. This was Miramar Ranch Elementary. It was just amazingly bountiful a few years ago. So look at that cucumber. That's called a serpentine cucumber. And the kids just love it. It's amazing because there's so much food that we have lost in our vocabulary. Just like our language is very much diminished, so is our food. So these seeds are actually 300 years old. They're heirloom seeds. But because they don't store well, you can't transport them well. You'd have to take up a lot of space in a grocery store to stock something like that. They're not commercially distributed. So we're able to introduce kids to foods that they've never seen before, and that's really exciting. So that's Good Neighbor Gardens. And let's see. It's not a new idea. You know, this is something that was done in the 30s. Anybody ever heard of Victory Gardens before? Yeah. So those are schools, those are our kids. So Victory Gardens is the same concept. We were growing food in people's yards. We were sharing because it was wartime and we needed to maximize our available cultivatable spaces. So it's not a new idea, but it is definitely an idea whose time has come. And we need to, consider, I want to get everybody in it. So mostly the reason why we've gotten away from it is essentially because of the love of money. And the way we treat our agriculture and our water is that we basically, by the way we live, is we contaminate it. And that essentially starts to contaminate the earth, and that's why we're living in a constant state of natural emergency right now. So it's really important that we consider water and we consider the way that we live and use water so that we can try to reverse the effects of that. So I want to not get too technical with you guys today, but I do want to teach you a little bit about how to do that, okay? So there's trouble in paradise, and because I believe that Walt and I came together 20 years ago and then found our way back to each other in 2008 and have been working on this project up until this point, I know that we were given this opportunity because we are supposed to be involved in a divine will or a divine purpose that I want to inspire all of you to take part in. You know, I don't want you to be discouraged by the state of the earth and the state of our water. I want to offer ways that you can actually get involved, okay? Did you know that you are a living organism? Do you know that a plant is a living organism? And an insect is a living organism? And the soil is a living organism? And a community is a living organism? So a living organism needs 5 things to thrive and survive. One of which we've discussed at great detail, which was my love story, love. Does anyone have any idea what the other 4 things are? Water, of course. Nutrients, sun, and air. Water is divine. Water is divine. Did you know that your body is 75% water? And it just so happens that the earth is 75% water, and a plant is 75% water. So now I'm going to take a risk because I understand that at Creative Mornings, it's really important to be authentic. And in order for me to stay in a place of authenticity with you, I need to be able to share with you using my own faith language. My intention is not to offend anyone. My intention is to be as honest and candid as I possibly can because I feel it's relevant. Do I have your permission? Okay. It is written that water existed before we were created. It is written that God said, let's form a dome to separate the waters above from the waters below. The waters below are referred to as the sea, and the dome is referred to as the sky. But as for the waters above, there's not a lot that's said, and so it's left to our investigation to figure out what that is, okay? It's also written that we were divinely created by God in the image of God. And if our bodies are 75% water, what does that say about the Creator himself? So if water is that precious, why do we contaminate it by the way that we live? And if water is that precious and we depend on it that much, and so does the place that we live depend on it that much, and the food that we were created to eat depend on it that much, why are we not able to manufacture it? You know? But we don't, and we can't. But guess what? Trees do, and they can. Trees have the ability to bring water up from their roots and into their trunks and transmit it into their leaves and up to the sky. And if there's enough condensation, enough transpiration of water above the trees, then it creates rain, and then that's the water cycle. So water is very, very intelligent, and it's to be correlated with those things that allow us to thrive and survive. So trees, I mean, look at how much, first of all, look at how much water it takes for just to produce one apple, 19 gallons of water. To produce a car, it takes 39,000 gallons of water, which is equivalent to like 2 huge swimming pools at someone's house, to produce a car with the tires and everything. So water is a very scarce resource when we think about the way that we what we're doing in manufacturing. Also, it takes 634 gallons to make one burger. That's a lot of water as compared to the 19 gallons it takes to grow an apple. So I submit to you that the one thing you could do to help with our water problem is that you could eat fruits and vegetables. You know, and so whether you want to grow them yourself or have them grown in your yard or subscribe to a harvest box or eat fruits and vegetables, because that helps us make efficient use of our water. Trees have the ability to, like I say, take up water from their root systems and through their trunks and into their leaves and transport it into the air so that we can bring the water back down. And it's a cooling system which allows us to have less demand for water or for power, like heating and air conditioning, because they can actually cool the entire area. So evapotranspiration is something that trees can do. And they can also, this is kind of what it looks like. It also prevents water runoff. You know, when we just deforest our trees, then the water, when it hits the ground, it can run directly to the rivers, and all that erosion happens, and so we can't capture as much water, and so we end up with more heat, and that's basically what's happening as we're heating up the planet. So trees have the ability to evapotranspirate and also to sequester carbon. So carbon sequestration essentially means that there's too much carbon in the atmosphere by the way that we're doing our agriculture and our manufacturing and the way that we're living. And so trees and plants have the ability to capture carbon out of the air and bring that carbon into their root systems and create carbohydrates, which allows them to feed the microbes that are around there so that they can mutually benefit one another and flourish. And that when that happens, we can retain more water. And we literally have the opportunity to reverse the effects of global warming by sequestering carbon. So when we plant gardens in people's yards, or we plant fruit trees, and we are able to layer on an amount of compost over the top, we call that top dressing, then we're able to sequester carbon. So our goal at Good Neighbor Gardens is to take San Diego and turn it into a carbon sink, where we're sequestering carbon in as many areas as we possibly can, so that those trees and those plants can continue to do the evapotranspiration and carbon sequestration that we need in order to protect our lives. So that's a little diagram of carbon sequestration, and our gracious neighbors, we encourage them to compost at home. So that's something else that you can do in order to help with our water problem. You can take your kitchen scraps, make sure you put a measure of browns and water with that. So compost is 50% greens, which is anything with water in it, 50% browns, which is anything without water in it, that's natural. And then you combine those together, and you need to make sure it's wet like a wrung-out sponge. And when you put air in that, it starts to heat up. So you either turn it with a pitchfork, or you can buy a composter that you can crank, and it turns just like that little wheel here. And before you know it, that will turn into nutritious, dense soil that you can then layer on top of your fruit trees that will allow them to photosynthesize better and bring that carbon out of the air, and also evapotranspirate better. So that's something you can do at home as well. So trees are amazing. They not only produce the oxygen that we need to breathe by taking in that carbon and releasing the oxygen for us to take in, but they can do all this other great stuff along with it and also provide us food. So we are, at our schools, we are actually doing carbon sequestration because we've installed what we call soil labs. So the kids are writing friendly letters to their local businesses, and they're requesting donations of green waste and brown waste. And then they're combining it in their soil labs that we've constructed to build compost. And then the children have elected to donate the compost back to individuals in the community that have fruit trees so that they can be a part of the solution. And these kids are second graders. So this is the Good Neighbor Garden model. If you can imagine, a school garden is the sort of a feeder farm, and then you have all these home gardens around the feeder farm that contribute an amount of bounty to the entire community of good neighbors that would be eating from it. And if you multiplied that from one neighborhood to the next, this is our carbon sink that we're talking about. All of those gardens will need compost. And we layer on our compost sometimes, every quarter. Depending on the plant's needs, we might do it monthly. So this is the model that we would love for everybody to be able to get involved in, whether they're eating from it or growing or just volunteering. And I just want to say, sort of in closing, that, blood runs thicker than water. And this is my family, my sister, my mother, my daughter, myself. And the man that's sitting there at the table, that's my great-great-grandfather. And when my great-grandfather lost his wife, he moved home to be with his parents, and that's my grandma, the second one on the right, or on the left. And he was a professor of agriculture at Lincoln University, and I had no idea that he was a professor of agriculture and that I would go into, urban farming after the age of 40, But when a couple years ago, after not having started this project very long, I'll get back to that slide in a minute. Where's that one slide I wanted to show him? Sienna, it's not here. We installed a garden for an individual whose father started the university that my great-grandfather was the agriculture professor at. So, all kinds of miracles are happening as it related to this project that we started. So, blood runs thicker than water. Somehow I made it here, and I just really wanted to share that with you because, I know that this project, everybody is supposed to be involved. It's really a community development project. And so that's my family. And this is just an inspirational slide that I wanted you to see that basically says, we've just begun. We have to crack through the surface of this problem that we have called global warming. But with respect for water and good water practices, we can start to see it begin to grow. And before you know it, we might be able to see some bounty again. And if it's too far gone, at least we can attempt to love one another in the process of trying. And so I want to inspire you to do that because after all, that's what we're here to do, is to love one another. And we're 75% water, so let's get on with it. So kids are having wonderful time at school with a harvest kitchen. They're learning how to prepare the food. They're learning how to offer the food as a service to the community to get the word out. We actually have our chef here today. Our harvest kitchen chef is actually in the room. You want to wave your hand over there? That's Chris Galicia Brown. I had no idea she was going to come today. But wow, the kids harvest what they grow, and they prepare it, and they offer it and share it with their teachers and their parents, and it's just amazing. And they also get to harvest and set up their own little farmers markets at school. So this is their farmers market at one of our other schools. And every once in a while, we'll have a little community, what we call a get down, where you can come and learn something. That was our companion planting get down. So we populated those beds, but that's pretty much it. I just wanted you to see our kids at the end. It's going to get kind of loud. You ready?
Decomposition! 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 Decomposition!